Well, moving on to politics now, and the national vaccine rollout is set to begin in just 2 days, and GPs around Australia are expressing concerns that they are yet to receive any of their doses.
The rollout plan has received some criticism from health professionals. Let's now bring in our poly panel. We're now joined by Liberal MP Jason Falinski. We've also got Labor MP Josh Wilson, who's coming to us from WA as well. There's a lot of chaos, there's a lot of uncertainty over this rollout that's expected to start on Monday. This is, of course, the rollout of Phase 1B. Jason Falinski, was there a better way to approach this without the chaos, without the panic?
Well, if there was, Fazia, we would have done it a different way. I mean, this is the first time anyone has tried to do this in Australia's history. It is the first time this is being done in any other part of the world. So we have learned a lot of the lessons from overseas. We are applying them to this rollout. We understand that there are some concerns, but we've done some really smart things along the way, including ensuring that we had domestic production of the vaccine, which means we're not relying on European production. We've seen in places like Canada where they don't have domestic production, where they're at the whim of production facilities in other parts of the world. There will be hiccups along the way in the rollout of this vaccine. Australia's very lucky. We have zero community transmission, so we can take the time to get this right, and that's what we're going to do.
Josh, is that right, what Jason is saying? This is a huge undertaking. It's not surprising that there have been hiccups.
Well, the vaccine rollout is super important. It's the key phase in our recovery from the pandemic, and at the moment it's badly off track. And in last week we've seen a number of serious bungles in key areas, and these are matters of basic administrative competence. I mean, they've had plenty of time to ensure that the booking system works, to ensure there's been engagement with the health service delivery network, and that there's enough vaccine being distributed to meet the need as people are being prompted to take up the vaccine. These are the kinds of elements of basic administrative competency that would not be unfamiliar to someone organising a children's party. You make sure that the email address on the party invite actually works. You don't invite 30 children if you can only get 10 in the pool. And if you want your neighbour to come over and provide some supervision because they've got a first aid certificate, perhaps don't go banging on the door 10 minutes after the party started. And these bungles will slow our recovery and they undermine confidence.
Jason, you know, this really doesn't bode well in terms of confidence in the health system. You know, you've got your GPs complaining that they haven't been notified. You've got certain GPs also complaining that they haven't received the vaccines yet. Phone lines that are jammed as well. Elderly senior citizens who don't know where to go and how to get their vaccines as well. The messaging is all over the place here. And when you say that this is unprecedented, well, it isn't, because we have seen polio vaccination programs previously in Australia being rolled out successfully as well. So surely, in terms of administrative bungles, this would have been thought out, planned out months ahead before Monday.
Oh, and it was, Fazia. I mean, the fact of the matter is the polio vaccine, which you're talking about, happened over decades, not over a 12-month period. I mean, what medical scientists have managed to do in terms of getting this vaccine to the point where it can be rolled out is history making. I mean, Bill Gates has been on the record saying that when he first heard of Project Warp, he thought there was absolutely no way that we would have a vaccine within 12 months, but we've managed to achieve that. This isn't a birthday party. I mean, I like Josh's analogy, but this is about rolling out a vaccine to 25 million people. That is not something that's easily done. Even Amazon, when it rolls out new products and new booking system, gets it wrong. The federal government has not had to ever roll out a vaccine to 25 million people in less than 9 months. There are always going to be hiccups along these ways. There are always going to be GPs that are unhappy they're not getting paid enough. Usually how these flu vaccinations take place in a normal season is somewhere between 15 and 20% of the Australian population is vaccinated, and it is conducted by pharmacists who get paid no money for conducting and providing these jabs. So these are the sorts of different things that are going on this time that are involving different health professionals And there's a lot of messaging going in a lot of places, especially on social media, that is unhelpful in terms of making our community, our families and ourselves safe from this virus.
Jason, I think that Australians are largely understanding that, of course, that this is a huge undertaking, that there may be hiccups along the way. But I think the key issue is that the government perhaps has overpromised and underdelivered, and really come out strong at the start and promised all these things with the vaccine rollout, and they just haven't been able to deliver it.
Look, Joe, I'm sorry, I just don't agree with that. I mean, if you look at the New South Wales delivery program, if every other state and territory had managed to achieve what's been achieved by the New South Wales Department of Health, because of course a lot of these vaccines are being administered by state government health departments, then we would be largely on track.
Although, sorry to interrupt there, Jason, but sure. Gladys Berejiklian, the New South Wales Premier, said this week that if it continues the way it is, then they won't be meeting that October deadline. She was critical of the rollout.
Yeah, she has, but Joe, that was in the context of her announcing more centres, rollout centres. So that wasn't in the context of the program itself being off track. That was in the context of, for the New South Wales Department of Health to continue to meet their targets, which they've said, they were going to need to expand the number of places and centres from which they distribute the vaccine, which they have done, I might add. I mean, I come from Northern Beaches in Sydney. Under the New South Wales Department of Health program, the nearest centre I could have gone to was Hornsby. That's now being expanded to places like the Northern Beaches Hospital. So, I mean, that makes perfect sense to me, and I appreciate the efforts of the New South Wales government, and they're largely on track.
We want to move on to another story that the Morrison government just can't seem to shake off, and that is the issue of sexual allegations, sexual abuse and sexual misconduct that seems to be hanging around in the air in Canberra in Parliament at the moment. And this week we saw a bipartisan agreement to pass legislation to prevent all documents relating to the Jenkins review from being published through Freedom and Information Request or by the National Archives. I wonder, Jason, you know, Defence Industry Minister Melissa Price in the Australian op-ed this week also said this is a bloke problem, not a woman problem. Too often we hear about the number of women who've been raped rather than the number of men who have raped women. It is men who need to do better. Is it a bloke problem?
Well, Fazia, it absolutely is a bloke problem. I mean, Melissa's right when she says that. I mean, thinking back, I mean, this isn't just a Parliament problem. This is a problem or a challenge for so many workplaces in Australia. Now, Parliament needs to lead the way. Sadly, we haven't been. Sadly, it took Brittany Higgins to speak out about this for this to get the higher priority and the higher attention that it should have had all along. But that is happening now. There is a lot of cross-party effort being put into that. I would say on all of this that I was reflecting during the week, and I think the person who most got this right was Hillary Clinton back in 1998 when she attended a women's conference in Beijing, when she said women's rights are human rights. And I don't think that this is so much a women's issue versus a men's issue. This is an issue for humanity, and the Parliament needs to be and move very quickly to ensure that that's the case.
Josh, Jason's right in saying this isn't only a parliamentary issue, and it's not only certainly a government issue either. And there have been people on all sides of politics being critical about the behaviour towards women. This week we heard from a school captain at a Brisbane boys' college called Mason Black, and he said this is not solely an issue of protecting women, it's also about educating men. And I'm wondering if you personally have had any reflections this week about your behaviour, or not that I'm meaning to target you, but behaviour that you've witnessed or in your office, or anything to do with Labor, and perhaps any behavioural changes that you've seen that need to change.
Thanks, Joe. Well, I've been doing a lot of reflecting, as I think many of us have done, and all of us need to do. This is a deep-seated, long-standing cultural and structural issue in Australian society. Australia still has a pretty acute, deeply entrenched problem when it comes to sexism and the disempowerment and underrepresentation of women and all of the things that flow from that. And the last thing you need is for anybody to be in a rush to say, I don't need to do some reflection, or I have no part or no responsibility in achieving change. But I'd fundamentally picking up on some of the things that Jason has said, it's certainly not time for men to be getting out on the front foot and saying, I understand what the problem is. It's a time for us to listen to the scale and range and intensity of the anger, pain, bewilderment, frustration that women are expressing based on the things that they've experienced, and then together focus on actual cultural and structural change.
Josh, it does seem to be that there is a perception that in order for women to occupy high-profile roles, that men actually have to give up those roles as well. If I could take you back to last year's International Women's Day, where Prime Minister Scott Morrison said that he did not want, and I'm going to quote here, he did not want women to rise only on the basis of others doing worse. Josh, is the pie that small?
No, the pie isn't that small, and I don't want to make my reflections on the issue be a sort of an argument between me and the Prime Minister, but I think in some ways that goes to a similar line that's run by the government occasionally about addressing inequality and lifting up people who face disadvantages. They characterise that as class war or the politics of envy, when really it's about the politics of fairness and the politics of justice. And we absolutely need to move towards what you're saying and recognise that when we don't have equal representation of women in all parts of life, that's an expression of a patriarchal and sexist system. It's prejudiced away from women and unfairly in some cases towards men. I mean, I looked at some of the numbers this week. There have been about 1,200 members of the House of Representatives in its history. There have only been 133 women, and 47 of those women are in the House of Representatives right now. There's still 68 of the 151 seats in the House of Representatives that have never been represented by a woman. And when you think about the 133 women who have served in the House of Representatives, that's about 11%. Compare that to the fact that over our history, there have been 90 men named John. That tells us something about progress we need to make. Now, Labor has taken some structural steps so that our party, our caucus and our cabinet represents the gender balance in the Australian society at large. Those are the kinds of meaningful things that need to be done to achieve change.
Jason, Josh was speaking just then about the importance of listening, and I know that there were a lot of women at the March for Justice rallies that were very angry that the Prime Minister and the Minister for Women, Marise Payne, didn't come out of Parliament House, to the short walk out of Parliament House to speak to those women who were gathered there. Why didn't he do that?
Look, I think, Joe, that this has been a really disappointing aspect of the coverage of the march, which was that the Prime Minister and Senator Payne invited the organisers or whoever wanted to come and meet with him in his office. There are obvious problems with the Prime Minister around security, access, all sorts of different things, going to protest meetings of that nature. Now, that is not, but he did the best he could in the short period of time that he had to reach out to the organisers and ensure that if they wanted to...
The view was that was on his terms, though, Jason.
It's not about being... Joe, that's really unfair. It's not about his terms. It's about he's the Prime Minister of the country and that there are security issues around those sorts of issues about him going into big crowds. Now, he did the best he could under the circumstances. The organisers chose not to take him up on that invitation. That's absolutely within their rights, as he said so. I don't think that the Prime Minister in any way, shape or form is not trying to listen to what people are saying and is not making himself available to so that they can speak to him about these issues. I just think this is an unfair criticism on the Prime Minister, in fact, on any Prime Minister in those circumstances.
Right, Jason Falinski and Josh Wilson, it's great to have you on the program this morning. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Fazia.